All right. Well, welcome, Victoria. It's great to be with you here again for crowdfunding for authors, one of our favorite topics to talk about, I think, you and I together. There is never a shortage to talk about. Really excited to be talking about this crowdfunding for authors because we see so many authors every day struggling with how to bring their book to life and how to market it and how to create book tours and all of the different activities that they want to do about their book. So we're going to be covering a little bit of that. We did this session actually to be able to help authors, and it doesn't matter what stage of the writing process you're at. You might have 1 or 2 or 5 books in your head. You might have a book out there. I was just talking to an author the other day. She's got several books out there, and all of them are collecting dust right now in her living room and being used as coffee tables. So she has her book, but actually wants to bring it back to life. She wants to do a second edition. So we see this session as being really useful for current authors who are looking to get their first book out there, or a second or a third. This will also work for authors who are in collaborative books, as well as authors who have their book out there right now and are looking for new ways to market the book or bring the book to life with other resources, such as a workbook or a video course. So we had an author recently who's doing a card deck. And of course, authors who want to share their message with a wider audience and make a bigger impact. So I'm thinking we should start with some introductions, Victoria, in case people do not know who you and I are. And we're going to introduce each other rather than introducing ourselves. So Victoria, why don't I hand it over to you and then we'll flip it back to me.
That sounds a good plan. So Charmaine is an 11 times best-selling author, 5 of her own books, featured in 11 others, and 2 more are ready for release. She is a certified professional speaker and expert in collaboration, funding dreams and bringing projects to life. Her company, Raise a Dream, has helped many clients implement her strategies to make their book a business. Over the years, she has raised millions of dollars for projects she has been involved with, for charities that she supports, for her own projects, and in collaboration with her clients. She has sold thousands of books through collaborative campaigns, sponsorship, and bulk buys.
Welcome,
you, Charmaine.
Thank you. So Victoria, I love introducing Victoria. She hails from the United Kingdom, from the UK. She's lived in Canada for about 18 years now. And one of the things that really surprised me as I got to know Victoria well over the years that we've known each other is what an incredible marketer she is. And that's actually her background. She studied at biochemistry. So you're probably wondering, wow, that's so different than what she does today. But isn't that the truth for many of us? Our careers take us on different paths. So she actually studied biochemistry at university. She is now a crowdfunding and marketing expert. And Victoria, do you use biochemistry at all now in the work that you do? I just want
I don't use biochemistry at all. I mean, the analysis, yes. The data analysis, yes. The ability to sort of dive and find out stuff, but not biochemistry, yeah.
Okay. So some of the aspects of it. Now, Victoria has an extensive background working with some very, very big brands that all of you know, such as Tide, Pampers, and Max, TD, and before setting up her own consulting business, which was about 9 years ago now, providing strategic marketing support and coaching and running crowdfunding campaigns. And Victoria, if I understand, you've been involved in more than 100 different crowdfund campaigns that have raised well over $20 million collectively.
Yes. Yep.
Woo! So you are dealing with a real expert here. We've known each other for about 5.5 years now. We've worked together on other projects. We've worked together leading a weekly program, Crowdfunding for Authors. And we've also supported different projects that we're on. And I've been able to watch a lot of the crowdfunds that Victoria has done the marketing for, or actually set up the whole crowdfund for her clients. So I've been learning as well so much from watching Victoria do her genius, as I call it. One thing that would be interesting to hear is, I think how did you actually get into it? So close the loop for us. Biochemistry, $20 million plus raised in crowdfunding. How did you get there from where you were prior?
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I'm happy to close that loop, but I just want to say one thing about, we've worked on projects together, and but the other thing is, working together on that crowdfunding for authors cohort, it even inspired me to write a book. So, that's what, working on now. So I have come over and seen both sides, just as you were saying about you observing crowdfunding as well. So. But yeah, it was about 10 years ago, and I had a son in the Calgary Boys Choir, and I was on the board, and I was asked to run a crowdfund for their 40th birthday. And I was like, I have absolutely no idea what a crowdfund is. I don't know what it is, but I'll look into this. And what I discovered is crowdfunding is getting lots of little bits of money from a crowd of people who together can raise a larger amount. And the larger amount was to make the 40th birthday concerts all free, so that everyone in the community could come to the concerts without any barrier to entry from a financial point of view. Now, they did ask for donations actually on site, and that money went forward to set up a scholarship for boys to join the choir who perhaps couldn't afford to. So I was blown away by the impact. We got all those sort of small amounts of cash from a large crowd of people. So we activated our crowd, all our young boys and their families, and we funded all the concerts. And I investigated further, and I saw how it's an effective way to leverage your community and to achieve your goal. I'm going to throw it back to you now, Charmaine, because you've asked me a question. I'm going to ask you a question. Why is it important to properly fund a book?
Oh, what a juicy question. Let me start with how many expenses there are in writing and publishing and marketing and keeping a book alive. My first book came out in 2010 after being published in Chicken Soup for the Soul, What I Learned from the Dog. And when I was published there, I thought, what is involved when you're an author? What does one do with this? And then my chapter actually caught the attention of a publisher. And very shortly after I was published in Chicken Soup for the Soul, I was actually traditionally published with my book On Toby's Terms. And I was blessed to have an amazing publisher who basically said, Charmaine, you need to learn everything you can about the publishing and the book marketing world, because the majority of the books that will sell will be because of what the author is doing. And so I was coached and mentored by some incredible people. So one of the reasons that it's really important to properly fund your book is so that you can actually reach the audience that your book was intended for. And when we crowdfund and we fund our book properly, and if we're using crowdfunding to do that, you're not only generating revenue, you're actually generating a crowd, an audience of people who want to consume your content, who are interested in getting to know you. A couple of things that are important to know is that the research tells us that the average author sells about 250 books. And I've heard stats up to about 500 books or 1,000. Doesn't matter which of those numbers you pick.
Small number.
It's a small number when you take out the cost of everything that it took you to bring that book to life. And
well,
so
I was going to say, even your soul, because you put your soul into it.
Yes.
And then you typically writing for somebody else, and if somebody else doesn't get to read it, that would be the thing that probably hit me the most.
Right. Yes. And so the stronger your marketing plan, the stronger the community of readers that you have, the better your book will do. A couple of other things, regardless of how you publish, whether you're self-published, traditionally published, or you work with a hybrid publisher, there are costs involved. They're from editing to design to layout, but then that's just getting the book done. And there's a whole bunch of other costs in that as well. Then there's the book is done, and now the world needs to see what you have created. And marketing can be expensive, especially if we don't know what we're doing. I had to learn I had my business for many, many years before I became an author, but marketing a book is a little bit different than marketing a service. So I learned a lot. One of the key lessons I think I learned, Victoria, was the power of what I call OPA, other people's audiences. And that is one of the rich outcomes that happens when you crowdfund, is that your book, your message, your strategy is reaching other people's audiences. And people who are traditionally published, their publisher is still going to be expecting them to be selling books. It doesn't fall just on the publisher. A couple of other things I'll say is that I love selling books in bulk. When I started selling my books, I sold them one at a time, just like pretty much every author. And then I did a book signing and I offered people to buy 2 books instead of 1. And people said yes. And I thought, wow, who knew? And so I started doing that. But then I noticed that online and virtually, there were ways that we could sell in bulk, and crowdfunding can help you with that. But it's another reason we want to properly fund our book. But all of this takes time, energy, know-how, and the right information so that you don't make mistakes and you don't overspend time or money on things that aren't helping you. So crowdfund, you can hear I'm a big fan of this. Crowdfund is a way to generate that much needed revenue and that much needed audience that is far beyond people that are in your social media community, your database, your family and friends. So that's why I'm excited about the conversation we're having tonight, because crowdfund can really help authors accomplish so much with getting their book done, getting it out there, and building an audience of raving fans who can't wait for your next book.
I was just going to comment on one thing. In our last cohort that we took through for crowdfunding for authors, I think one of the things that was really interesting for me is when you're drilling down to find your crowd, it's the people that your book's going to resonate with the most. I found it interesting that some people actually better define their crowd, but some people actually changed their crowd. So they realized that who they were writing for was different to who they thought they were writing for. Yes. And so I think there's that clarity is something that I wasn't expecting, but I thought that was really interesting. And when we talk about activating the crowd, it's also, defining that crowd as well.
Totally. Absolutely. And, a question that people often have at this point, when we start talking a little bit about crowdfunding, people are always asking, how much do you crowdfund for? What is a typical crowdfund? And I know that crowdfunds are all over the map in terms of what people crowdfund for. And Victoria, you have done campaigns from $5,000 to a lot of money. I don't even know what the top end is.
My largest was 1.6 million.
Right. So there's a big, and that wasn't
for a book.
Yeah, it wasn't for a book. Yeah, everyone's going, what? So these are for other projects as well.
Clothing company in that case. So.
Okay, cool. For authors, I don't know, would it be fair to say, I think what I'm seeing authors look at for a crowdfunding goal tends to be between about 5 and 15 or 20,000 is what we often see authors crowdfunding for. And even when we go and look on the different crowdfunding sites and we go look at different authors that we've never met, but they're doing a crowdfunding, we kind of check out what they're doing, because that's part of the learning process for new authors. That's what we see, about 5 to 20,000. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I agree. I think, and I mean, I know you're going to go into this as, it depends what bells and whistles you want to add in there. You can certainly go higher, but I think 5 to 20 is about where most of them are doing, which is going to get all the key elements that they need for their book.
So maybe we start at the beginning for a minute and have you define what crowdfunding is, so that we're all having the same understanding of a word that you're going to hear us mention a lot. Would that be okay, Victoria?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a great place to start. What is crowdfunding? So as I mentioned a bit before, it's the raising of funds from lots of small amounts from your crowd. But I think the key thing to remember is it's not new. We've heard about it because of the online platforms. It seems to be coming to the fore. And certainly you know, in 2021 was like the year of crowdfunding, and certainly going into a recession as we may be going into, I think 2023 could be another bumper year for crowdfunding. But I think the sort of clearest, probably the most relevant example is if you think of musicians in sort of like the Tudor times, 16th century musicians, 17th century musicians, the way that they wrote their music was a crowd of people would get together, their sponsors, and would give them money to pay for this symphony or to pay for this piece of music. And when I was reading about that as one of the earliest forms of crowdfunding, sorry, I had something with bits in it before I came on, and I probably shouldn't have done because I've now got the bits stuck in my throat. But to me, that's very similar, because this is a creative passion, the music, and it's being funded by the people who want to hear the music. So I just thought that correlation was just lovely when you think about writers. But the sort of standard sort of historical view of crowdfunding is the Statue of Liberty. So the Statue of Liberty was donated to the people of New York, but they had no way of sort of getting it in place, and they had no plinth to put it on. So a local newspaper crowdfunded. They didn't call it that, but basically it was. And if you donated $5, you got a 6-inch model of the Statue of Liberty. And if you donated $10, you got a 12-inch model of the Statue of Liberty. And all that money was put into a pot. And that was what paid for the plinth that the Statue of Liberty stood on. So this has been around for a very long time. It's just technology has developed. We have online platforms, facilitates the process. We have social media, emails, newsletters to promote the campaigns. So that's really the change. And I think, I talk about 2021 being the year of COVID and the year of crowdfunding. I think we all got a lot more comfortable doing things online. Many of us were relatively comfortable doing things online, but now nobody bats an eyelid at banking online or putting money online, buying online. So I think, that's one of the things that's really driven us to where we are today.
And I'm sure that a lot of people, a lot of authors have seen on social media, or they've heard or read about platforms like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, and those are they've been around for a while, but there's even more to it than just that. Is that right, Victoria?
Yeah, I mean, Kickstarter and Indiegogo, they are what we call rewards crowdfunding campaign. So there's lots of different types of campaigns, and each different type has a different platform behind it. So a rewards crowdfunding campaign, people back the campaign, and in return, they expect a reward. So I've actually got my watch on today, which is from Indiegogo. And at the time, it was the latest, greatest Android watch. And I got it before everybody else. I got it at a better price. And it was actually a bit late. Actually, it was quite late. But they emailed me and told me why it was late and kept me informed. And I was still happy when I got my watch. And that's really what people are sort of looking at. So, for example, the first access of a new book, or an invite to a book launch, or the book and a follow-up one-on-one session with the author, especially if you're in, if you're also a coach, or you provide other services, you can wrap your services up around that sort of reward.
Yeah, I can really see how relevant crowdfunding can be for authors, whether they have a book or they're in the process of writing a book, or already have a book and they're now launching it again. Great way to not only generate funds, build that crowdfund, but to also access other supports and promote other products and services, because you're right, a lot of authors do have more than only their book if they're providing coaching or training or things like that, or have other products and services. And one of the things I know you talk a lot about, Victoria, is that when authors or aspiring authors are considering a crowdfund, really critical that they understand that there are certain types of crowdfunds. You just mentioned a rewards type of crowdfunding campaign or platform. But why is it so important, and what do we need to know about choosing the right platform for our crowdfunding campaign?
Yeah, so it's very much about understanding what your objectives are, And then you select the platform and the type of crowdfunding to sort of match that. So it's, you know, you really have to make sure you're selecting the right type of crowdfunding, and you really have to make sure you're selecting the right platform to meet your objectives. So we talked about rewards crowdfunding campaigns. We also have what we call donations crowdfunding campaigns. So, you know, that's where people don't get anything tangible back, but they get a feel-good feeling. So, for example, if your book could be very impactful for a disadvantaged group, people might be willing to donate to get your book out to the people that need it. So, you know, it could be, you know, so that could be for a donations crowdfund. If you're looking for people to invest in your business, then you may look at peer-to-peer lending. So peer-to-peer lending, you know, you put money into a pot, and then that money comes out and you get a percentage back if you're a backer of that sort of campaign. If you watch Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, you'll hear about royalties campaigns. You know, for every dollar you sell, I want 5%. So those are royalties campaigns. And then there's also investment or equity crowdfunding. And so that's when people actually get equity in your business in return for their investment. And they believe in your business to grow and are seeking a return. So this involves securities, often shares. So it's highly regulated and uses highly regulated platforms such as Equivesta and Front Funder in Canada, Republic. I was going to say Seed Invest, but Seed Invest has been bought. So Start Engine in the US. We've got Seeders in the UK, but that's just been sold as well. So there's a lot of movement in this space. But you know, if you're looking to grow your business and books are part of it, then you might be considering equity crowdfunding.
Great. So lots of different types of crowdfunding platforms. And so one of the things I'm learning from you right now, Victoria, is the importance of knowing what type of campaign you're wanting to do and what the reason for your crowdfunding campaign is in the first, what is your goals and objectives. So tell us more about how do we know what our objectives are?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I mean, like, you know, when you're choosing your platform, when you're choosing your type, it does all come down to what is your objective. So are you trying to pre-sell books? Are you trying to raise capital to fund the book development, or to have a professional launch so that you don't sell 250 copies, you sell 25,000, or, you know, I don't know if we want to be spares and sell 3 million or whatever. Do you want to promote your book with a target audience? Do you want to get your book sponsored to reach a specific audience? Or do you want to build a business where writing is a revenue stream? From there, you can then select the type and assess the right platform. So there's, you know, really does come down to what your objective is, you know, for your book.
Yeah, I love that. And I know there's certain platforms that you sort of receive the funds as you go. And then there's these all or nothing platforms where if you don't generate all of the goal that you had set, you get zero. So it's really important to also understand what are the limitations of each of those platforms and what platform is going to be best suited to accomplish your goals, as Victoria said. And you're probably really getting the sense right now listening to Victoria is that crowdfunding can do so much more than just raising funds for your books. One of the things that I know from being an author is that people want to know the person between the covers, like who is this author? What inspired you to write? What were you thinking when you wrote a certain part of the book? People really like to learn that. And I learned about that well after my first book had been published. And I noticed that I was getting the same questions from people. And I thought, wow, I feel like I missed an opportunity. What if I was to be doing videos and things like this leading up to the book being released? And we see a lot of authors really using their crowdfund as a way of not only building a community, but getting to know the community. And one of the things I love when you talk about, Victoria, is you talk about it's not just other people's audiences, it's their audiences as well, because you're building a fan base who also, that group of people want to share you with their world.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing about crowdfunding. It's not just raising funds for the book. It's a very powerful tool when it's done correctly. So yeah. But I think I always have to just sneak this little thing in. It's not quick and it's not free, but if you invest the time and a bit of money, you will see the rewards.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you talked about it. It does take some time. This isn't a quick fix, but one of the things I know from you, Victoria, and having taught with you in the previous cohort and watching your crowd funds, is that there really is a process. There's kind of a model to follow. You've done this model with over 100 very successful crowd funds, and when authors apply that model, they see the success. We see lots of crowd funds, Victoria, you and I know you've had rescue calls where authors have launched a campaign, didn't know you, didn't know how to do it, and then the campaign is struggling and sometimes never actually gets launched correctly. So talk a little bit more about the preparation. How much time do we need to prepare? Because I know that is one of the starting points that you talk to authors about, is coming out of the gate with the right amount of time to plan.
I will do, but I just wanted to pick up on that one. I spoke with an author recently and her campaign had stalled. And it was really interesting because she'd done elements quite well, but she had missed out. You had massive gaps as well. So it's quite interesting. So just, we have, a 90-day process to prepare a campaign, and we make sure all those steps are in place. And we have ways of monitoring it just to see, have we actually got the traction? We want to make sure that the crowd is really warmed up so that when the campaign launches, people are there straight away backing the campaign. They want to be the first ones in, because research has shown that if you hit 11% of your target on day one and 33% in the first week, then first 7 days, you should hit your goal. So, I think from my point of view, it's, making sure that audience is completely warm and making sure all those steps are in place.
And I just want to capture something you talked about, those two key in terms of your targets, and that 7 days being critical and those first couple of days being critical. And we often see crowd funds where people take a very slow process. And as you said, all the elements aren't there. And those are often the crowd funds that are not successful because the energy comes at the very beginning of that launch. And then it's sort of those first 7 days, as you said, are essential. So let's talk a little bit about, what can we raise funds for? How much? What's appropriate? What do you see authors doing with their crowd funds right now?
Yeah, well, I'm actually going to throw that back to you, because I think it's one of the things that I found eye-opening was, when you're putting a budget together as an author, what are the elements you need to have? And then I'm going to come in from a crowdfunding point of view once you've answered that question, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So some of the things that authors include in their book budget, so not necessarily crowdfunding, but just in a book budget, is they're definitely thinking of things like editing, getting good quality editing. Having a family member edit your book is not a way to go. It will show that it wasn't professionally edited. A good cover. And I've interviewed lots of bookstores, from the Chapters and Kohl's of the world to the independent bookstores. And many of them have told me that if the cover is not good, they're not going to take the book. It doesn't matter how good the book is. Because you think about what intrigues, think about the times you've gone into a bookstore. What draws you to a book? If you didn't know about a particular book on referral from someone, what draws you to choose that book off the shelf versus another? So a good quality cover is important, and the things like the layout, that the layout is done properly. I just saw somebody's book recently, and they were trying to save on printing, and the book is in a 10 font, and I can't read it. It's I have my reading glasses on, and it's still sort of having it up here. And so she was trying to save money And people are frustrated with her book, and they've told her as such. So she's actually going back to print and is going to spend the funds. So the printing, the quality of the paper, all of that, you might be choosing just to do your book as an EPUB online, for example, on Amazon, having it as a digital book. Sometimes authors are also looking at getting their book into audio format, and there is cost to that. Recording your book on your cell phone, not going to work. It's got to be really done high quality, again, because people won't buy. And then there's also the cost of the launch. You want to be considering, are you going to do some kind of an in-person event? Maybe it's at a bookstore or maybe a local library. Our book signing, the very first event we did, I had it fully sponsored. And so we had a conference room in a really nice hotel with wine and cheese and a musician, and all of this was sponsored. Doesn't mean you have to do that. You might just want to do a launch party on Zoom. Totally okay and powerful too. But you need to consider all of this. Are you going to be doing media, any kind of a press release or any kind of press PR person, professional working on your behalf? You want to consider things like shipping, the shipping costs, if you're going to be sending out books for people to read and give reviews. And then there's the audience development. So there are a lot of costs. It doesn't mean that every book has to check every one of those boxes, but producing a good quality book, those are important boxes to check, because what will happen is that it will be hard to sell the book if it's not good quality.
And this is where I step in from a crowdfunding point of view. So what you'll look at is, what's the bare minimum I need to launch my book? So if you say doing something like a Zoom launch, low cost, but doing a flashy one in a nice little room with wine and cheese and a musician, more expensive. But what you can do is, with crowdfunding, there's quite a bit of gamification. You know, I talk about that 11%, 33%. Success breeds success. So what you want to do is have a bare minimum that you can still launch your book. And so when you hit that, you're showing success. I'm 100% funded, you can launch your book. But if you get that extra 5,000, then you can do the event. If you get another 5,000 or another whatever, you can now get this great designer to design your cover. So you can add to it. So, you know, this is where, you know, it's really good to look at those costs and actually work out what you want to do and which version of those, and do you want to upgrade? So, you know, I think it's really, you know, really cool way of looking at it. And when you're looking at the sort of, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20,000, you know, those are perfectly suitable for a rewards crowdfunding campaign. And, you know, I mentioned Kickstarter and Indiegogo earlier, and I mean, it's interesting because the duopoly. So, you know, we've just had these two companies out there. It's really starting to get broken. And so we've been working with platforms like Crowdfunder, which is great for creative campaigns. And they also have a free version of their platform, because you have to take into account there is a cost for raising capital. So we have to factor those sort of things. Now we know that PayPal still charges its fees. You know, there's what's happens in life, death and PayPal fees. I'm sure there's something else in there, taxes. But it, you know, which does reduce your, you know, but having a free platform can reduce your costs. It's interesting, as you mentioned earlier, we have what we call all or nothing campaigns. So if you don't hit your target, you have to give all the money back. How hideous is that? So, you know, it's making sure that you sort of hit those targets, but that's why we talk about the gamification. Let's see what's the minimum you need to be able to launch your book. You do need to spend a bit of money on, you know, building your crowd, but I can talk about that in a second, because I could see you had a question there, Charmaine.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking too, and sometimes this is where authors need help. So if you're looking into your crowdfunding budget or your book budget, Victoria, I've learned from you time and time again the importance of being able to tell your story so that people that your crowdfund backers understand why they should care about your book and why they should be excited for your book coming out. So is this something as well that people may want to factor into it's obviously part of the planning, but sometimes we need to hire someone who's going to write a very powerful bio or your why, as you call it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, you have to be brutally honest of who will benefit from your book, and really dive into the people who are going to find it most valuable. And these are the people who are most likely to back your campaign. One of the things that, I sometimes see is what I call a spray and pray. People reach everybody. And, there is no book out there. Well, there might be one that's for everyone. And so, so you have to focus in on who's going to really benefit from your book. So, I think that's something that we have to really, help people identify.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard you talk about things like you need to know the problem that you're solving, the issues that your book will address, because this is all part of building that audience as well, and those supporters and backers.
And it's also, a third of the money is actually going to come from people you already know. A third of the money is going to come from people they know, and a third's going to come from additional activity. But what you need to do is you need to tell a story, and you're the experts at telling stories that resonates with that target backer. So you need to, so that when the target backer reads your campaign or reads any promotional material you've got out there, they feel like this person's writing for me. They're not writing for anybody else. They're writing for me. And I need to have this book in my hand, because this book's going to, it's going to be a really interesting read, or it's going to make a difference in my life in this way. So actually understanding that your backers and being able to speak to them, it's storytelling. You are the experts at that.
Well, I'm really taking away that. So the one piece that you're speaking to now that's really important is that messaging. How are you messaging your book? How are you messaging your story? What is your why? And then the other piece that you were referring to is planning. So I'm assuming that when messaging is done well and planning is done well, you are then setting up a crowdfund for success to be able to support the different costs of your book getting done, the launch of it, things that you might want to wrap around it, like a workbook, or promote your other services. So messaging and planning kind of go hand in hand. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Messaging and planning. And the other thing is making sure, you don't talk about what your book is. You talk about the why. So why people should read it. What's the impact? This is going to be a story that's really going to engross you, or, that you're going to relate to, or this is going, the impact. I think that sort of messaging needs to be strongly in there, but it's also, how do you get it out to the right audience? How do you get it, and it used to be said you had to hear something 7 times before you acted on it. I think last time we spoke, I said it was 11 times. Well, I heard this week it's now 21 times.
Oh, wow.
So things like
other crowds can help us hit that target.
Yeah. But the thing is, if you've got to someone's got to hear your message 21 times, that means, looking at things like social media, that means looking at things like PR, email newsletters. And, building up an email newsletter that you can tell people about your campaign. You can put snippets of your book in, get people excited about. They also get to see your writing style and go, I like the way they write. But it gives people that sort of drip of information, so that when you actually go to them and go, my campaign's live, back it. It's slightly nicer language than that, but that's basically what you're saying. People are all excited and want to get straight in there. But it comes down to those multiple touch points. And so, yeah, it's interesting how the world is changing very rapidly.
Well, we've talked about these crowd funds where people don't hit their target. They miss some of those key steps. They don't hit their target, or they don't ever get the crowd fund sort of running successfully. But I love seeing authors who knock it out of the park and they exceed their goal. And I mean, I've seen, actually recently, a colleague of mine had set $7,500 goal for the campaign and did great in those first week. And then another kind of set of traction happened in the third week. And so she ended up bringing, I think it was 12.5, so well exceeded her campaign. Another one had a similar $8,000 campaign and was able to bring in 10,000. So, you know, when we look at people exceeding their crowdfunding goal, tell us about that, because that's great news when that happens.
Oh, absolutely, and that allows you to, opens doors up to do more, because you know you've now got more people buying your book, you've got more people aware of your book, you can add extra features in. So you know, you perhaps have a bigger launch event or add color illustrations. You know, it's really, you know, an exciting time. But you know, one thing I should also sort of allude to is many authors work on your own. And so, you know, if you have one of the key success factors for crowdfunding is actually having a team. And so if you've got a team, fantastic, but not every author works in a team. So you're trying to work out how you build a sort of surrogate team who can support you and help you get your word out, but also to help you get that book published. And so, you know, I think that's a key thing we need to, you know, to think about.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And when you understand the process and the model and the different platforms and are clear on your goal, and then you can engage people. Like I know some of the crowd funds that I've supported, their team, they were solo authors, they didn't have a team, but they brought in people like myself, like their other friends and colleagues, to be on their team. So we were part of the cheering squad, we were part of the group getting their campaign in front of other people. And that was very, very powerful. And I think very affirming for the author, because it can feel lonely for entrepreneurs, for authors. When you're a solopreneur, a solo writer, it can feel lonely and isolating. And what I have learned, this is the good news, what I have learned is after 30 years of being in business, the majority of people want to help. But if we don't ask them or give them guidance on how they could best help us, then sometimes those opportunities are missed. And this is what I love about crowdfunding, is that part of your model, part of that planning process actually also teaches people how to engage their friends and family and neighbors and people that they work with or volunteer with to become part of their team and champions.
Yes, and we try and do it in such a way that you can still stay friends with them afterwards. Or as I say, you can still have Christmas lunch with them as well afterwards. Because, you know, sometimes we feel a bit awkward asking that. Couple of things there. So one, absolutely how to ask. The other one is understanding reciprocity.
Right.
So, you know, you're giving and taking sort of evenly, so people feel that's fair. One of the other things that can come out of crowdfunding is actually market research. So you might have, you know, you might do a book in English, and then you might want to do one in French and Spanish. And you what you might see is that you get 1,000 backers on your English book, but you get, you know, 4,000 on your Spanish book. Right. So that may make you realize that actually this book resonates with the Spanish audience more. Or you might have an extension workbook, and you know, you find that people will get the book and the workbook, you know, twice as often as just the book. So you then realize how important the workbook is. So that market research is another little useful tool that you can get.
Yes. Well, I think it's a good opportunity for us now to just segue over to questions to see what questions are popping up for people. I have a couple questions that are always asked that I'll bring up as well, but let's turn it over to, you can put your questions in the chat box or feel free to unmute and ask your questions. We'd love to hear what's going on for you when you start to think about crowdfunding and the possibilities for your book.
Hi.
Go ahead. Hi, go ahead, Kathy.
Hi, I just have a question. So if you're crowdfunding for your book, are you crowdfunding for the expenses of the book, or is part of this going to the author as a payment for the writing of the book? And what's the protocol there?
Yeah,
Shall I let
great
you do that one,
question.
Charmaine? Because I know you've answered that many times before.
So a lot of times, what I typically see would be that authors are crowdfunding for the different elements related to the book, rather than sort of being paid to write the book. Because sometimes people might feel odd about that, like, oh, I'm not sure I feel good about giving that author $50 towards the kind of their paycheck, so to speak. What people get excited about is something like, ooh, Kathy's got a campaign going on, and part of her crowdfund is that she's going to give us sneak previews of the cover as it gets funded through we're going to see the first chapter, and only people that get to see the first chapter are the people supporting the crowdfunding campaign. And that's the stuff I think that people get excited about. Actually, and another author was writing a novel, so it was a novel, and that what I thought that did a really cool thing. They had 4 or 5 characters. So the storyline had been written for these characters, but a name had not been chosen. And she did a perks, I guess a rewards campaign, you would call it, Victoria. And so I think there was 4 or 5 opportunities for someone to be sort of the winner of the name that would be the character. Another one wanted to have images in her novel, images of the characters, that the key character that was kind of the focal point of a chapter. So she had an artist friend who would draw. And then, so there was things like, if you pledge this much, you'll be able to choose the color of her gown that she wore to the fancy event in chapter 4. So things like that. And I think that's what people get excited about, is almost like being part of the book with you. Now, that being said, there's also authors who will build in some of the other costs, like, if they have to contract somebody to do something, whether it's graphic design, for example, or layout. So I would say, typically, that's my long answer to say, typically I see people crowdfunding for elements of the book, and including things like the launch, translations, wraparound products and services. And I've seen authors where they say, what my big goal is, if I think you call it a stretch goal, Victoria.
Yeah.
If I reach my basic goal and I bring in more money, I would actually like to create a video training program that supports this book, or a video that walks you through the writing of the book. And so sometimes I've seen authors do that, and they kind of weave in some of their time into that overall cost of creating that program or that video.
And I was even thinking, but if you have a book, say that's $20, and it might be that the cost to produce is $10, and you might offer it on the because people are looking for that keen pricing, they might want, might offer it 15. You're still going to make $5, so you will still are paying yourself in some way. Profit. So there is that there, and picking up very much on that last point. For people who offer coaching or training, you might wrap in, for $200 you get the book and you get an hour one-on-one with me. And, so you're actually getting paid for that hour one-on-one. So there are ways that you can ensure you get paid, as well as paying your illustrator, paying your proofreader, paying, whatever. Yeah. But we can't eat an elephant in one sitting. So we had somebody in our last cohort who was raising $50,000. So a lot of money. But she broke it down into all the different elements that she wanted to do in her campaign. And so that's breaking down the elephant into bite-sized chunks. So that's why we talk about it going to, the translator, going to the proofreader, going to the designer. It doesn't actually, every penny doesn't have to go to that one. If your designer's $3,000, it may not be the first 3,000 is going to go to the designer. It may be, 1,000 from here, 1,000 from here, and 1,000 from here. But we just do it like that to make it easy to communicate. But then we put a caveat on the page to say we choose the right to spend the money as appropriate, so that we can launch the book effectively. So we have a bit of a catch-all in that. So that was probably a bit too detailed, but
Oh, that's great. Good question. And the last piece I'll add to that, Victoria, picking up on when you're talking about how authors can generate revenue for themselves through the sales. One of the things I like about crowdfunds, and it's the way that I sell my book on a day-to-day books on a day-to-day basis, is selling in bulk. So we see a lot of authors who will say, you know, you can pledge $20 and you get a copy of the book, but for $250 you get 10 copies of the book so that you can share those with friends and family for holidays and birthdays and whatnot. And so I've seen authors where they will do a bulk offering of their book in a crowdfund. And that's how I love selling books, because that's where authors are then generating money, not just for the expenses of writing and producing and launching a book, but they're actually getting paid, making revenue from their book sales. And that's what we want to see.
Yeah. And I mean, it's almost like a sales channel, you know, once you get it running like that. And, you know, it's one of the reasons we were talking about Crowdfunder, because they separate out the shipping and they charge the person backing your campaign for the exact shipping. So you're not having to go, oh, there's such, where is it going to go? And also, you know, just take so much of that pressure off you, you know, because you're not having to sort of chase and wonder, have I got enough money? You know, because one of the things, and you know, the classic one is the t-shirt. You often see crowdfunding campaigns which do t-shirts and everyone thinks, oh, that's really great. But actually to make a t-shirt and ship a t-shirt, it's really expensive and you don't end up making much money out of it. So you've got to think very strategically. Like if you had you were creating a nonfiction world and it was like highly branded, then that might make sense to have a t-shirt because you want all the cool dudes wearing your t-shirt. But if it's, you know, if it's not like that, then I wouldn't go down that route. So there is a bit of a perk strategy, as you've probably gathered.
Yeah, that's important, because choosing the perks that are going to resonate with your readers, but that also makes sense. Otherwise, it's sort of like, it feels like the perk is out there in left field. And that's one of the questions we get asked all the time is, what are some of the perks that could be offered? And I think it's a great opportunity for people to be creative, though. I've even seen people go out to their audience as they're planning their campaign and ask them, I'm going to be doing a crowdfunding campaign. If you were going to support a crowdfunding campaign with $35 or $50, what would you want to see for that? And that, you know, that's, some people will say, I want to see my name on social media, or someone, I had one author who said one of the most common pieces of feedback they got was a phone message, a voicemail message from the author thanking them. And so really this was kind of like a minute out of their time for each person to thank, but that had as much power as getting the book for that particular audience. So asking people what would be meaningful for them is a great strategy too.
And I think what's interesting about that is, if you've picked up the phone and spoken to that person will never forget that. And so when you have your next book or your next extension, they will feel they have a relationship with you. And that's one thing that comes out of crowdfunding, is you build that relationship that you can't easily do in every bookstore across North America. So, you know, that's something, just, you know, it's not just investing for now, it's investing for your time and money for the future. You know, is to get this book launched successfully, but it's also ready for the next book or the next product.
Yeah, great. Any other questions?
Okay.
Well, go ahead, Victoria. Sorry.
I was just going to say thank you to everyone, you know, for the questions. And I think it's been a really good discussion. And I mean, we are having a deeper dive session coming up. We've been asked to do this information in Europe. So we're off to Europe well, we're
virtually.
virtually next week, and then we'll actually be doing a deeper dive with a longer session into some of the things that we've discussed this week.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got your email addresses. We'll send an email to everyone registered on the call. So the email invites that came out, that's actually my email address. So just reply to those and I will genuinely get them. So through Eventbrite, it actually comes directly to me. But we'll make sure you get the details of that. And it's just been good to see the creative juices. And I always enjoy chatting with you, Charmaine. You always have some great examples. So
you too, Victoria. And thank you all for joining us. And for those of you that are watching the recording, thanks for taking the time to listen, and really excited to see what people start to think about for their crowd funds. Thanks again, Victoria.
You're very welcome. I'm just typing fast, so give me. There we are. That should be the email you have.
So if you're listening to the recording, it's victoria@thecrowdfundinghub.com. Go on and make sure that you're following, there you go, it's right on the banner too, thecrowdfundinghub.com, and make sure you're following Victoria's the Crowdfunding Hub on social media, because you will be also seeing some of the commentary that Victoria does. She often does reviews of people's crowdfunding campaigns that are videos, and you can learn so much that way. And make sure you're following Raise a Dream as well, which is our brand, because we do a lot of work around helping authors. And I hope you'll join us on the next call where we dive yet even deeper into crowdfunding, what that can look like for you as an author bringing your book to life. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.